are a very powerful group to publishers. They control $200 billion of spending in the US. Their population dwarfs Gen X and baby boomers. So this may be a positive indicator for the future of paid content for publishers as well. So something for all of us to noodle as we get into our discussion, and our thanks to Marrow Matchbox again for conducting this timely research. And now on to our program. I'd like to introduce our moderator, Katherine Wallis. She is very well positioned to lead the talk tonight after devoting her 2016-2017 Atkinson Fellowship in Public Policy to looking at alternative sources of civic news and information to help fill the void created as the news industry shrinks. Her findings were published in the Toronto Star. Kathryn was managing editor of the Montreal Gazette at a time of sharp cutbacks and restructuring. She then became executive producer of the short-lived but beautiful iPad Evening Edition, and that was her second stint at the Gazette. She also worked twice at the Toronto Star and once at the Globe and Mail. Please join me in welcoming Kathryn Wallace.
The CJF has pulled together a fabulous panel here tonight to look at this hopeful side of news with these newcomers. Nobody on the panel has been in existence for more than 3.5 years, which is very cool. So it shows, they are not only examples of what's possible, but also of how the news and information world is changing. So I'm going to do a very brief introduction, not getting into too much background for everybody. Starting from the far end, James Mirtle is the editor-in-chief of the Canadian operation for The Athletic, which is a sports digital site. It started in Chicago early 2016, and recently has gone through a rapid expansion. It's now in 8 US cities and 7 Canadian cities. And it does in-depth local sports coverage. Erin Millar is editor-in-chief and CEO of Discourse Media, which is based on the West Coast, but is now expanding across Canada. Its focus is to work in collaboration with other outlets, other media outlets, and with communities to produce in-depth journalism on issues of particular public concern. Saleem Khan is with The Conversation Canada. This is an academic journalism website that started in Australia in 2011. It has since spread to the UK, the US,
France,
United
States, Africa,
and Indonesia. And it started it launched in Canada only just in June. He is the editor for Emergent Media, Science and Technology for The Conversation Canada. Dave Bidini has the absolute newest outlet here. It had the West End Phoenix, Toronto's West End Phoenix, published its first edition just 4 weeks ago. And it is really unique among new media startups. It is print only. And it is a really big broadsheet, a really big old-fashioned broadsheet covering the West End of Toronto. And it will be published monthly. So the first question that I want to ask everybody, I want everybody on the panel just to give us an idea of the kind of journalism that your outlet focuses on and who your audience or community is, just so that everybody in the audience and I can get a good understanding of what you're representing here. James, can I start at the end?
Sure. Our audience obviously is sports fans, but it was interesting seeing the slides because it talked about really in-depth material. That's kind of, we're going for the hardest of the hardcore sports fans, the ones that are willing to pay for really in-depth analysis that they're not getting maybe potentially from other sources. So that's kind of the niche where we fall into right now. And it's been interesting to see, we're really looking hard at what kind of stories people are willing to pay for and what kind of stories they're not. And that's kind of the foundation for the company right now.
All right. Hi. So Discourse Media, we're the oldest media outlet on this stage, which is insane for me to say. Very cool. Very cool. We're a Vancouver-based digital startup that focuses particularly on investigative journalism. So the stories that we're telling are about issues that are either not being reported or being poorly reported for some reason because they don't fit neatly into sort of the daily news grind. So the communities that we're serving, and we think really particularly about communities, we'll get into that more later perhaps, are usually somebody who's basically being underserved by the existing media market. So for example, we're doing a lot of work right now about child welfare and asking people, kids who are in the child welfare system, advocates who are working, experts, people in government who are making policy decisions, really involving them and really helping us understand where is there an opportunity for journalism to provide some value to the conversations that are happening about how we're going to improve this system. So that's how we think about the communities that we're serving. And then the audience, which is overlapping but slightly different, that we're really reaching, interesting also to see this, are primarily between 20 to 40. They don't like being called millennials. I'm one of them. And what we're finding is that they really care about issues. There's not a lot of media outlets out there that have really treated them like actors in the future of the country. They've been disempowered politically and economically for a long time, and they are willing to support and be part of a media outlet that is providing them content about issues that they think are important and is really serving communities. So that's what we do. Thank you.
The conversation is focused on, as you heard, academic journalism, and it's a bit of a misnomer, I think, because what is that? Essentially, our writers are deep knowledge experts in academia, people, PhDs, and professors and researchers. So we have people with somewhere between 7 and 50 years of experience in their fields of expertise writing for us. And what they write is edited by professional journalists. It's all analysis and context, and what we're finding is, it's really amazing actually. Every day we come into work and we're amazed at the kind of knowledge that's out there and available that people don't know about. And the phrase, why don't people know about this? People should know about this, is uttered pretty routinely in our newsroom. As far as our audience goes, we're finding actually, I mean, once again, this information was interesting, and I think it probably mirrors in some ways what you're finding. It's actually going younger than I think perhaps we thought it would at the beginning. And there just seems to be a real hunger out there for that kind of deep analysis and context that people aren't getting elsewhere, and so they're coming to us.
I just can't believe I have to stare at a Boston Red Sox banner during this whole panel. I'm just going to grab the paper. I'm going to come into the crowd. No, I'm not. So this is our newspaper here. Just so I'll show it to you. It's probably better than me kind of explaining it, but yeah, sure. Oh, that's nice. Thank you.
I was going to do the Vanna White thing, but
That's good. You're very talented. So it's a 30-inch broadsheet newspaper, and this is the DPS. It's a double-page spread. So it's really big. And there it is. And I brought them for you guys to take home tonight. It's actually subscription, but we're giving away for free because it's a special night. You're all special. Yeah. So really, listen. We're doing this because we feel we kind of have to do it. It's just something. It's an expression of who we are. Our team. There's about 6 of us who work on the paper. It's something we love to do. For me to kind of sit and project whether it's going to be accepted, who's going to read, I have no fucking idea, right? And I think, and we're going to try. We're just going to try our best. I mean, I know just being a West Ender that community newspapers are bereft in our neighborhood. You know, they were all bought by Metroland a few years ago, and the content was gouged out. They were wrapped in flyers, and they're offensive. They show up on your porch, and they're garbage for the most part. There are people who write and work for them to a point, but the soul has been clawed out of them. I just think the opportunity existed for there to be, something that would roll and tumble up on your porch that you would, anticipate, with great desire. that would have great writers, great photographers, and great illustrators in it. So that's what it is. And
Okay,
it's
that
gonna
really
be.
gets into what my next question is, which is all of you, your outlets started when it was just in the last 3.5 years, so when it was really clear that the advertising model that has supported media for so long was broken, that consumer news habits had radically changed, and that the traditional media was shrinking and disappearing in many cases. So what were the key elements that made you start, or that made your outlet get going? Like, was it an underserved topic, an underserved audience, a business opportunity where money could be made? Or you started getting into that a little bit. Do you want to elaborate any more? Like, were there particular topics or a sense of neighborhood, or?
No, I just think it was just really the opportunity to be creative, using a canvas that everybody seemed to have been abandoning, really. Like running away from print and running away from the broadsheet and running away from the 30-inch canvas. So in a way, it kind of gave us an opportunity to sort of reimagine it a little bit. So I know that's the case too. And it's funny, as soon as we took 6 months talking to hundreds of people before we actually really locked the model into place. But I think it was Ali Renema who said that we should run in the direction of a PBS-style model, which meant the paper is ad-free. He was like, you should talk to your neighbors about supporting the paper, and that's kind of, we've gone in that direction. And it's largely subscription supported and patron supported from people in the neighborhood. That's kind of.
And the ideas come from your writers? Like, they feel like they come from your
Yeah,
writers?
come from our brains. It's good. Yeah, writers, illustrators, for sure. Yeah.
It has a very art culture kind of feel to it.
I guess, yeah. We're going to try to do a bit more hard news, but we're a monthly. Like somebody said that we're slow news. We can't compete with, right, stuff that is happening on the box, right? So it's really slow, super slow.
Slow news doesn't mean you're behind. Slow news is a different kind of news, right? It's more thoughtful. It's more engaging.
Way better is what you're saying, I think.
That's how we feel. Although, I mean, we're turning things out every day, and I'd say that sorry, this question just escaped me now. I was so engrossed in
You're doing
what you were
great.
saying. Thanks.
The elements behind the launch of the outlet. What was missing? What made this necessary?
So the launch of the outlet, credit is due to Alfred Hermida and Marilyn Young in BC at UBC. They had seen the model playing out in Australia, and they worked for 2 years to get our organization up and running, to get some initial subscribers and funding, and to really set us up to start doing what we do. And then Scott White, our editor-in-chief, who's here tonight, he went out and recruited the team. And it's a fantastic team. I'm having fun. I think I mentioned that before. We're all having fun at this. And the thing is that as we know, we're seeing a decrease in budgets all over traditional media. And one of the things that ends up getting cut is the budget to do those kinds of deeper, longer, more insightful, informed kinds of pieces. And so the model really, it seemed pretty obvious to all of us that this is something that we need, and we're not seeing it out there. There's less and less of it out there. So we need to fill that gap. And in fact, the model is so successful in Australia, where it started, that other news organizations have reporters embedded in the conversation newsroom to see what the organization is producing, and then produce packages around the conversation's work down the line. And so it's really become integrated into the media ecosystem there, and that's what we're hoping for here. So all of you who are at news organizations, come talk to us afterward. We're happy to give you content, because the great thing is it's free. It's all Creative Commons licensed. So there's really no reason that you should not be using it.
Sorry, were there particular topics that you were hoping to get from academics, or was it more like just commentary and analysis, expert?
It's really across the board. Pretty much anything you would see covered in any kind of general interest newspaper, news magazine, online property, we address it. And some of the ideas come from the editors, and some of the ideas come from the academics. They're doing primary research, and they have something new, some new papers that they're working on or have published. They'll come to us and say, here's something we're working on. And I mean, again, it's really fascinating. It's really been eye-opening for all of us, the amount of really fantastic knowledge that is being produced in this country that doesn't see the light of day until now.
So for me, I spent about just over a decade as an education reporter. I started my career at Maclean's and then was freelancing, working a lot for the Globe. And I founded Discourse because I was super frustrated with my ability to do in-depth reporting on education. So after I had been reporting for a decade, I had some ideas about the systemic issues at play that were preventing that system from addressing its challenges. And yet I felt like all the content that I was producing was very, was really not leading to any real impact on those conversations. It was kind of news hits about the same old things that sort of conflict between the unions or whatever it happened to be. So it was sort of that frustration that brought me to wanting to do deeper work on a particular issue. And then we developed this model that is really, we're organized in investigative units. We have 5 of them right now. And these are teams led by a reporter in close partnership with a producer-editor who are putting together collaborations. So they might work with a lot of contractors and that kind of thing, other media, collaborators. Like we are learning a lot from some of the collaborative models in the States, like ProPublica's, who's one of our partners as well. And to do this like in-depth, really high-value journalism, investigative journalism about these particular issues. And so we definitely started from that point, and that's where we grew. But I think it's very different now than it even was when we started from that point of frustration 3.5 years ago, because I think there's a really unique business opportunity in this moment. And so earlier today, actually last night, we threw a party just a couple kilometers away from here to make the announcement that we're bringing Discourse national and expanding from 5 investigative units based in Vancouver to 20 serving communities across the country. And the reason that we're doing this right now is because we think that there is a really unique business opportunity in this moment that is related to some of the things that we're seeing coming out of this research. And the first one being that the ad model is really at a turning point. We've got more than 70% of Canadian digital ad market now going to only 2 players, Facebook and Google. Like it's over. Let's let it go. Which, it's going to be, it has been a painful period and it's going to continue to be a little bit painful. And I don't relish that, but I also relish what comes. I'm excited about this phase of what comes next. And I think it's time. The second one being that we're seeing not only consumer habits online shift around how we consume content, but willingness to pay for content. So, of course, Spotify, Netflix, all of these things have created, particularly among millennials, consumer habits of paying subscription fees for content that they value. And that's really important. I think that's the same play that you guys are doing as well. And we're seeing that starting to translate into willingness to pay for digital news content. So I do think that is going to change. And then, of course, the third factor here is what we've all been calling the Trump bump, which is this like sort of moment of awareness among a lot of different people that, hey, journalism matters, and if we want to have in-depth journalism, we need to pay for it, and that's led to the acceleration towards growth in subscription. So that's the opportunity that we're saying, okay, now is the time for us to really bring Discourse national, and so we're doing it.
It's very interesting. There's so many parallels between all of the different publications. They're all being driven by the same thing, and it's that the contraction of the way that it used to be done and what used to happen. And I don't know if I would say no area of content has been hit harder than sports, but in newspapers, sports has been hit extremely hard because it's seen as not a foundational piece of what a news publication is. So I was at the Globe Mail for 12 years, for example, and their sports section shrunk dramatically in the 12 years I was there. It went from 25 to 30 staff down to about 4 after I left. So that kind of contraction has really, I think, opened opportunities, and it's opened opportunities for innovation in all of these different spaces. And the same as what Dave's saying. I mean, when I went into this and I was like, I don't know if this is going to work, but I think it's going to work, and I think it's a good idea. And in our model, what we're trying to do, it's almost like a micropayment model, because we're only charging around $4 a month, and you get the entire bundle of content that we have. You get all of our national writers, you get all of the cities that we cover. So the more that we expand, the more content that a subscriber is going to get. At this point, we have over 100 writers over North America, and we've been expanding every month or two. So, I think it's really interesting is that the more success we have, it can kind of snowball because the package gets bigger and more appealing to more people. So.
Okay, we've gone into the business model a little faster than I expected, but this is good. So the Athletic started with venture capitalism, right?
Yep.
So does that mean that do they own a piece? Do your investors own a piece of the company?
Yep.
So it seems like part of the Athletic is that it was just seen as a really good business opportunity. It's not just a matter of coverage, right? Is this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they felt like there was a need that they could create coverage that people would be willing to pay for. So they were more certain of it than I was. I thought maybe this would work. But it's a good idea. And I think it's a really good idea because if you keep the cost low enough and the quality of the product high enough, you can get over that hurdle of convincing people to pay. And the most interesting thing right away that we saw is that it was mostly young people that were signing up. When I saw our numbers and they showed them to me, I was blown away because I've been at the Globe Mail for 12 years. It was something like, this is in the early days, but 81% of our subscribers were 35 and under or something like that. It was younger than me. It was most of the people that were reading us. So that, to me, really spoke to the fact that we weren't tapping into taking readers away from newspapers. We were finding a different audience.
But in the end, you are taking readers away from newspapers, right? Because you're providing
Not if
what
they're
the
young people
newspapers-
that don't read newspapers and don't subscribe to newspapers. Most of our writers we didn't hire directly away from newspapers. So, it's different audience, different content. It really feels, and a lot of the writers that we have are very young as well. I mean, I'm one of the oldest people in the company right now, so.
Ultimately, I guess the goal is for the subscriptions to pay the full costs. Is that right? Or
Yeah, I mean, in Toronto they already do. I mean, we hit that barrier in the summer at some point because the way that our model works is if you pay up front for a full year subscription, it's a better deal. So the majority of people that are signing up are paying for the full year. We're getting that money up front, so it was pretty easy for us to, once we got enough people signing up, it was easy for us to meet that barrier. Now we need to keep bringing people in order to meet that mark, but I don't know if I'm explaining that properly, but the fact that everyone pays up front and we're not paying the staff up front, it really gives us, we're not dipping into that venture capital really at all in Canada right now.
oh, really? Okay.
How many subscribers do you have?
We don't actually give out the numbers. In Toronto, we have more than 15. More than 15. We have more than 15,000 in Toronto, and the number's a lot bigger for North America. In Toronto, we launched about a year ago, and we turned the paywall on in January. So it's been about 10 months.
And how's it going in the other Canadian cities so far?
Good. It's early. I mean, we went into the other Canadian cities in early September, and in some of them, we don't even have a single full-time staff person there. Sometimes we are using freelancers. Sometimes we're relying on, we hired a national team of writers. So sometimes people in, say, Winnipeg, where we don't have a full-time writer, we have 2 freelancers, and then they want to read the 2 freelancers write about their team, but they also want to read the national coverage of the NHL or the NBA or whatever. So it's the strategy across Canada was to start small, and we'll build as people sign up.
And you're ad-free now,
We've always been ad-free, yeah.
but are you going to, is that part of the philosophy, or is that just?
My bosses tell me no, so on the business side, they say no, that if we can continue to sell as many subscriptions as we need to, then we won't need to go ads. We could do some sponsorship on things like we have podcasts, we have a newsletter that goes out every day, we could do some things like that, but we really don't want to clutter the app that we have or the website too much. So, and that's one of the things that we've sold as this is why you would subscribe to us, is that there's not going to be pop-up ads all over the screen. There's not going to be autoplay video. There's not going to be clutter. You're just going to get the content that you want.
So you are also a subscription-only model, but non-profit, right?
Yeah, I don't think this is working. Yes, that's true. Hello? Can you guys hear me? Okay, cool. I need more monitor. Can I get some more monitor?
And so what was your thinking to make it a subscription thing rather than go for ads? What was behind that?
I think for the same reason that James talked, we're also sick of we hunt for the X's when we're online, right? Just trying to get rid of those annoying things and pop-ups. And so we wanted also to create more space for content, frankly. You see, like, there are a lot of single pages that are with one single illustration or one photograph or one comic or one story, and we kind of wanted to keep them as less corrupted as possible, to try to keep them as pure as possible in a way. Also, we originally were going to go chase small vendor ads, which is traditionally what community newspapers have done. But I think you do that, the butcher shop, you do them better by telling a story of their lives and telling the story of the shop rather than have a $50 business card ad in the top corner of the page. So, yeah. I mean, for us, like, it's been, James mentioned small and then incrementally, potentially bigger, and I think that's great, but I think you want to be small and mighty first, right? You want to be good small. And I think really we've seen in media there's that overarching, in digital, in our digital lives and digital world, especially startups, there's that, you want to blow up big, fast, and you want to catch that heat, and you want to conquer. But I think just being, small and good is important. And one of our steps we took towards that was I did, and I still do, door-to-door subscription sales, which is fucking fascinating. Like, it's a lot of front porch drama. Once people cross that threshold, it's really super wild, and it's also an amazing way to get to know neighborhoods. And I would say 1 out of every 5 persons that would come to the door and we would engage them would invite us in. I've got an antique bass from 1966. You got to check it out. So the guy's just like smoked a bowl, and he's like, there's a weirdo at his door. I mean, those are short films waiting to happen right there. But that was cool, like, to sort of see, again, doing something that used to be quite common, really, that used to be a thing. And I think that's the same is true with the broadsheet. Like, it's far enough away from us that it seems kind of weird and exotic and strange and interesting. So, yeah, and I've even been delivering too and doing a few routes and stuff, and that's a beautiful experience too, being out at 4 o'clock in the morning, and flinging papers onto people's porches and stuff, and it's purely romantic, and is probably not level-headed when it comes to distro or business structure or whatever, but it's really fun. So it's kind of that is a big part of it for us.
And it's kind of part of your marketing too, right? We are delivering this in a little red wagon,
exactly.
basically.
That's right. We won't knock over your potted plants. We'll try not to anyway. So totally. We have 48 volunteer deliverers, and they were all gold in October, and they're pretty good. We have 2 weeks as our second issue. They're pretty good for November, and our third issue we're going to deliver on Boxing Day. That's the grand plan, because I think that's the best couch reading day of the year. You're hungover, you're fat with turkey, and you don't want to. So we want to give you your paper so you can read your paper. But I don't know how many deliverers we're going to lose on Boxing Day, or gain. Maybe people just want to get out of the house. I'm not sure. Get away from the kids for 3 hours, and then February is a whole other ball of wax. So we'll see what happens.
Erin, you have the most complex funding thing going on with your organization, I think. Revenues from a lot of sources.
Yeah, so Yeah, we've got a pretty diverse number of revenue streams, starting with media commissions are one of them. We do workshops, we do talks, we do sponsorships with different foundations, nonprofits, and corporate partners who follow the best practices of the nonprofit news sector in the States around sponsoring reporting on issues. And yeah, we think that that's a good way to remain independent, is to have a lot of different revenue streams. What the plan is in terms of driving this next phase of Discourse's growth is to be introducing not a subscription product in the sense that we're putting content behind a paywall. It's a different model. It's a membership product, and we've been testing that and developing the technology around it and a whole bunch of things, doing all of that work, and that'll be out in the market in March, and that's what we're currently just announced yesterday and are currently raising venture capital for to do. So that's really what we're most excited about, because we think that that's the best way to be like directly serving our audience, and the biggest opportunity is to be asking them to support this and to pay for this. And so far we've gotten really, really good feedback in that way. So
Can you explain the sponsorship piece of your funding? How does that work, and what is that exactly?
Sure. So when we've started. So we have sponsorships with different partners. So for example, we do a multi-year project. We've just done a 2-year investigation into Canada's role in energy poverty in Africa. Well, it actually started as a global project, but the last package was specifically focused in Africa, where there's a lot of Canadian mining. And this was a project where it's messy. Takes a ton of data reporting. It means that we need to find reporters on the ground in these communities in Africa to collaborate with our Canadian journalists. So it's one of these things that really does not fit very neatly into the daily news cycle. We found a partner who believed in that issue area, that there would be a positive impact from seeing better reporting on that, which is the Waterloo Global Science Initiative, nonprofit based in Waterloo at the Perimeter Institute for Theoretical Physics, and they contributed some sponsorship to that project. So it's not about advertising in the sense that they care if their brand is attached to it. They have to commit to not influencing any of the content, which is also important to them because they don't know what we're going to write and they don't necessarily want to be attached to it. So it's quite similar to how the nonprofit news sector in the States was founded, and that's all fine, and it's been growing really fast. Like we're almost at $1 million in annual revenue this year, which is really exciting. But we do think that it's not going to grow in the same way that it has in the States, which I think is actually a good thing, because that means that we don't have the same income inequality where we've got these huge piles of private money who get to decide which issues get reported on and which do not.
So do you recognize them as sponsors in the piece?
We're very not in the piece. We're very transparent about all of our partnerships because we think that that's a really important part of maintaining the credibility of our trust with our audience. So we actually go beyond the best practices that like ProPublica does, where they just kind of list all of their sponsors on one page, even though those partners are sponsoring really particular issue areas. Yeah.
I'm just curious. So, but how exactly is it? Just because I'm knocking at that door too, and I wonder how it is represented, how the sponsorship is represented in the work. It's represented at the end or the top or in another.
It's usually in the end, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and then there's a disclosure about it.
Okay.
And then we collaborate with a lot of media too. So most of the media who pick up our pieces, and we've worked with everybody from the Terrace Standard in northern BC to the New York Times to the Guardian. They run a line at the bottom that acknowledges that it's part of this project with Discourse and with this sponsorship. So we disclose it in all the different places that it shows up, which I think is important.
And the ideas come from the sponsors? They come from you approach the sponsors, or it works both ways depending? Yeah,
it's mostly our team approaching sponsors and driven by the editorial. And our test, we have had sponsors approach us about doing particular issue, but our test about deciding whether we're going to go into a project or not is if our partners are willing to commit to we're very hawkish about our journalistic independence. It's absolutely critical to our model for our credibility with our media partners. and with our audience. So we've had lots of partnerships and projects fall apart over that, and I think it's important that we're willing to let them fall apart if we want to protect the independence of our work. And secondly, that it's responding to an actual community need or gap for reporting. So we do analysis around all of the issues that we consider taking on, looking at, okay, what is the coverage around this? Is there an opportunity to be communicating knowledge that's in academia that is not making it to the public or policymakers? Is there a data piece here? Is there some solutions journalism that we can be doing about this? Because there is promising responses to this that people just don't understand, like what is, and we make sure that we're actually providing value to the conversation. So that's the test. So it doesn't matter if we think it's a good idea, and if a sponsor thinks it's a good idea, if we can't validate that there is really an audience and community who really want to see and can do something with that information, we won't do it.
When you're doing training and events too, does that require a different kind of staffing? Like, do you have to have a bigger staffing in order to raise money in this way?
Around raising money or
I mean,
like doing
money,
the
like
events and stuff?
Yeah, do you need different staffing to do the events? It's a different kind of thing from journalism, right? And so I'm just wondering if, because that brings in some of your money, does it change your staffing as well?
Yeah, I mean, the staff that we hire are very different than, we hire really particularly for the type of work we're doing. So our reporters are required to do half of their time producing content and half of their time doing community engagement. And community engagement, there's a lot of different definitions, and we have a fairly broad one because we think each issue requires something different. But so the workshops and the events and everything they need to be that they're developing are part of their community engagement work. So our reporters, it's not their job to find sponsors to pay for it, obviously, but it is their job to say, hey, on the child welfare beat, for example, we have the highest child poverty in British Columbia. There's lots of media coverage of it every time a kid dies who's in the foster care system, and yet the young people who are in the foster care system are saying, oh, the way this is being reported on is really preventing me from getting a job or from not being thought of in a certain way or whatever. So there was an opportunity there to do some workshops with our media partners around improving the coverage. So we brought together young people, reporters from the CBC and the Globe and local radio and all of these people together to really work on, like, how can we improve our coverage around this? And that was something that then our sales team can go and say, hey, we're really doing valuable work. Someone come in as a sponsor. So really it's driven by the reporters and it's driven by like the needs of the community.
Saleem, your business model is really different.
Yeah, so it's, as I was saying, to launch, Marilyn Young and Alfred Hermida went around to recruit our sort of seed subscribers, which were universities and our universities. And we also have some foundation funding as well. But really, this is what the subscribers get, what the universities get from supporting the organization is they get their own. Is this on? Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, I think I need a monitor as well. So what they get is an analytics dashboard. So the university gets an analytics dashboard. The individual authors get their own analytics dashboard, and they can see in real time how their work is performing and who's reading it, where it's being picked up and published. And then we also do training for writing, editing, and we have a few other things that are in the works. But right now, that's the model. It's primarily subscriber. We're fully funded for the first year. We're working on our second year. I should say Scott's mostly working on our second year. He's out there beating the bushes all the time. And it's going well.
I totally need a Scott.
You do need a Scott. You really do need a Scott, but you can't have him because he's ours.
Maybe he lives in the West End.
Do you have a brother or sister?
He just moved to the West End. It's true. And also on the transparency part, I mean, all those, all of our funders are listed on the site at the bottom of the page. But also, each individual author, they fill out a disclosure statement to identify where their funding is coming from, who's backing their research. So, and it's right there on the side of the page, so you can see, and then you have comments at the bottom, and we read the comments and we publish the comments, and you can have a really engaging conversation, and the authors themselves often dive in and converse with the audience.
So each of you is a niche publication in a way, either in terms of topic or the kind of journalism that you're doing. What lessons are there from what you have for traditional media? Like, what is it from what you've done within your own organizations? Is there something that you just wish you could, shake traditional media by the lapels and say, why aren't you doing this? It's so obvious.
Well, I think we have to, what is traditional media? I mean, I don't think we really know. I mean, I think there's media that would have been considered non-traditional 10 years ago that is super traditional, right? So, but does it even exist? I don't know.
Right, so, I think I know
This
what you're
is getting
at.
existential.
Like the majority of our readers, they're reading on mobile. It's like and a few years ago
That's
wouldn't
so
happen.
2012.
No,
man.
but the point is though that it's like you wouldn't think that for a long, deeper, insightful analysis piece that you're going to be reading that on your phone. You would think you're going to be reading on a larger screen. And in fact, we're finding that people are reading it wherever they are because they have that thirst for that kind of information.
I think in that sense it is exciting, and that's why the question is complicated, because it's like Transformer kind of coming to life or sinking back into itself. It's moving, right? I think media is totally moving. I think that's kind of amazing.
So I'm a product of the traditional system, whatever that means, and so when we started Discourse, it was out of a frustration with my ability to do what I wanted to do within that system. So we were very, very focused on how do we fix this system? How do we make reporting better at these mainstream media outlets? And I actually think that that's really the wrong question. So instead of, when we shifted from thinking, how do we fix this broken system, to forget about that, what do people need? Then it got way more interesting, and I got way more hopeful about the future. So yeah, I'm not. There's going to be some traditional players who find their way out of this. There's going to be new publications, and I think the idea that there's a lot of different niche publications providing particular content that is really creating value for the end consumer, and that we consume from all sorts of different places now. What's all this focus on the broken system and the decline of media sort of disguises is the fact that we're consuming more content than we ever have before, and we're consuming it from so many different places, and that is really, really exciting, and there's tons of opportunity in that. So I'm just focused on this. What do people need? What do people want? And what are they willing to pay for?
There was, I think with the traditional, you mentioned traditional newspaper. I was being partly facetious, but newspapers spent, and James was right in the belly there. Newspapers spent a lot of money, a lot of energy trying to figure out what it was and what it was going to become. And it's refreshing, I think, for certain media, just instead of them seeing themselves against what's happening around it, simply being good for what it is, right? And I think that, I don't know, I wasn't, I was just I wrote a column for a national newspaper, but I think if those entities had just tried to be good at the end of the day, as opposed to figuring out what kind of good they were going to be, who knows, maybe things would have turned out a little bit differently. But I think all four of us are just, we're silos in a weird way. Sure, we're connected partly, but I just think we just want to be really good at what we do. And, that's how we're going to, I think, justify perhaps what
Is
we're
it
doing.
possible to be in the media world today? Is it possible to be the kind of organization that does daily coverage? Because you do daily coverage, but in a narrow field, James. The rest of you don't do daily coverage, right? You're not doing the City Hall coverage, the day-to-day zoning changes, like the people in your neighborhood will get the occasional in-depth story about something that gets at zoning changes, but you're not there to say this is the development that's happening. So how important is that kind of day-to-day thing still? Because that's not where new startups are going, right?
We'll sometimes respond to what's happening in the news, and we've turned around some pieces. We did some census piece. With the launch of the new National, Janice Neal wrote a great piece about that same night. We were out before pretty much anybody else, I think, with that analysis. And so we will respond to things that we think there are going to be conversations around, and that things that have deep resonance with audiences. We had a piece about the Tragically Hip as well on the day that he died, Gord Downey died. So it's not that we're consciously deciding we're not going to cover daily. It's we're doing what makes sense when it makes sense. And for the bulk of it, that means we're doing analysis and context with maybe a little bit more time and a little bit more thought and a little bit more work and effort put into it, as opposed to just trying to turn something around really quickly just to have something out there. And so we're picking our shots and we're taking them and we're getting a response to that.
We're having this debate every day because sports coverage traditionally has been, especially when the internet came along, it was not just a daily file. It's like every hour, or someone's hurt, now you need a story. It's kind of become a little bit of journalism where you're just pushing out a lot of content. And I think a lot of people, if you're working on the website, it's just quantity over quality. And that's something that I talk to our staff about a lot, is that we don't necessarily need a daily file. If you're working on something for the next 3 or 4 days, it's probably going to produce more value than you writing 4 daily stories each of those 4 days. So that's kind of what makes us different a little bit. And I mean, part of it is that we have to do that, because if we don't do that, if we're just producing the daily stories, those are available for free elsewhere, often in sports. The story about who was injured or whatever, that's already out there. So there's no point in us duplicating what exists for free when we're not. It makes no sense.
Yeah, I would build on that and say there's been a lot of focus on easily replicable content. Which a lot of news coverage is, those news hits. So we're finding there's a lot of resources in the media industry in Canada that are just being wasted because we send a gazillion reporters to all report essentially the same story. So we're about how do we reallocate those resources to do deeper reporting and more valuable reporting to people. But your question was does it still matter? Are we still going to have that local reporting? It's not just the sort of national level news hits like Downey. It's who is going to be at the who is going to be covering City Hall in Terrace, if I go back to Northern BC. And yes, we think that is extremely important, and that is something that we are thinking about a lot, and where we think that the opportunity, our next goal with Discourse is to be growing our model and building our technology such that we expand to 20 investigative units that are national. But what we're really trying to do is figure out how do we build a model that can be reporter-centric in communities that can address the local news challenge. And right now, I don't think the market is quite ready for that here, because we still do have a lot of newspapers that are in these places that are not quite viable business models, and that's going to shift in the next couple of years. And then we'll see what we really have left in terms of capacity. But we're totally thinking about that all the time, and I think there's a huge opportunity in that for sure. It's really important.
And a huge necessity, I think, because that's where you get the initial level of information that leads to engagement that you need for the people to be interested in the deeper issues, right?
Yeah, and I just don't think we've fully gotten there yet. In Vancouver right now, it is hard to find out what's happening at City Hall. We are a major city, and we're really hitting that point just now where it's getting to the point that people cannot find out what's happening at City Hall. That wasn't the case a year ago. So I do think we're going to see a lot of change in the next while as that all really settles out.
So where do you see I'm not asking you to look in a crystal ball or anything. This is partly what would you like to see, what do you hope to see, because what would you like to make happen in terms of where things go? The thing that's collapsing the fastest is the daily coverage, right? But you all seem to agree that we do need it. Like, we have to find a solution on how to fund that. Do you think that there's going to be a mix of smaller papers, like the bigger papers are not surviving, smaller papers will start up? From your experience as startups, do you see a way of starting up something that's more daily?
Well, I mean, it's ebb and flow, right? Industries go through cycles. Journalism is happening to go through its own right now. In terms of what we hope to see is more of what we're already starting to see, which is some of the national organizations following what we're doing. We'll put out a piece, and 2 or 3 days later, we'll see a follow-up piece that might use some of the same sources, that might use tackle some of the same issues, and they're issues that weren't part of the conversation, the national discourse before, but then suddenly are. We're doing a lot of things around Indigenous issues and race issues. Vinitha Srivastava, our culture and society editor, is a critical race theorist, and she's doing an amazing job bringing these complex issues that are very current and very present in our society to the fore. So I think we'd like to see more of that engagement and not shying away from the harder, deeper types of stories, the ones that take more effort. And like I said, we're there to provide some of that, but we'd like to see more of that happening throughout the industry.
I think if we had an answer to that question, we'd be at Woodbine right now. I guess. Actually, there's probably horses aren't running, are they, James? And it's probably season, so I don't know. Maybe the trotters still run.
I read about hockey. I don't know. But what you were saying before, Dave, though, about how it's changing is totally true. It's almost like it's like a train that we're trying to catch up to. And what we're doing right now is like working today. But I guess what I want to see is I think you have to continually innovate. And I think that that's part of where maybe you're asking about traditional media. That's part of where they've fallen short. Is that they became so big and so good at what they were doing, is that when it changed what you needed to be doing, it was very difficult for them to get to that space.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if I think about what is local reporting going to look like at the community level, I don't think it's going to look anything like a newspaper. Like, I don't think it's going to be, although I do hope that there are a lot of West End Phoenixes out there.
Exactly like that.
It's going to look exactly like that.
And
It's beautiful.
Awesome.
It's beautiful. But no, I mean, I think that one of the things that's held our industry back from that innovation that you were talking about was us holding on so tightly to this thing that we love so much. And I share that love for sure. But so we did some work in northern BC this year along the river. There's a number of small Indigenous communities along the river where they were proposing to put a pipeline for this big Petronas natural gas plant. This was a $1 billion project, the biggest business deal that was being proposed in Canada at the time, and there was literally no reporters on the ground that were covering that. So our provincial government in British Columbia was making these claims that they had they had done all this consultation in these local communities around this, and that they had the support of these communities. And we went up there and did some reporting and found that, like, not only did they not have the support, but the meetings that they claimed happened had not even happened. So this was our last premiere. Discourse had a huge impact and toppled that premiere, thank goodness. But it might be overstating our impact. But anyways, but like literally that is that was what we were finding, that because of that lack of reporting, the people in the urban center down in Vancouver were thinking, okay, yeah, we've got all this community consultation, it's not even happening. And one of the things that we did while we were up there is we did an information needs assessment where we actually studied how information was flowing in these areas. And news is traveling in these communities. It's not like news isn't happening just because the journalist didn't show up and put it in a newspaper that felt like a newspaper and looked like a newspaper and was something that we could recognize as a newspaper.
I disagree, actually. I disagree with that.
Can I finish my point at least?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, thanks. News was traveling through this series of of garage sales that happens every Friday, which is like this social thing in these communities where everybody goes to garage sales and trades, and like I don't even know how much they sell. Like it happens every Friday, so I don't know how much they can just pass around the same stuff. But it's like this social pillar of their community, and this is where a lot of news was being shared and stuff. And it was just that wasn't getting translated. So my point is that I do think that there will be news happens. There will be new things that emerge, but they might look like garage sales. They might look like social platforms. They might look like beautiful broadsheets. And we need to be really like open to that if we're going to be part of it.
It's interesting to see, though, up north. I spent 2 years up in Yellowknife, Northwest Territories, working for the News North outlets up there. And one of the things that was sort of beautiful was that people were, the default news organ still was the paper. It was, it was the Day Cho Drum in Fort Simpson. It was the Hay River newspaper, the papers in Rankin Inlet and Inuvik as well. And to me, it was interesting to go to a place, because we're so cynical in big cities. I think about accessing your news one way, but you kind of get your news one way up there still. And the beautiful thing is that I worked at the Yellowknifer. They'd actually write about the garage sales, and I wonder, like, maybe that's the salient difference. That the fact that those, I'm going to say traditional media again, but they stopped writing about the garage sales. Like they stopped writing about storytelling and information and gossip and hard news that existed at that street level. Everybody was kind of looking over this way, when in fact it's the kind of stuff that's right on the ground that really, really sort of matters. And that's one of the reasons, seeing how hard people worked on staff to still make sure they had all the news covered. Like the Yellowknifer, for instance, you'd read about a drug bust on one page or a samurai sword murder on one page, and on the next it would be like graduating high school photographs from the class that it was graduating out of John Franklin High School. So I think news media outlets can be everything. Like I really believe that there's a great range that is still there if we want it. And I think that's kind of encouraging.
So we don't disagree after all.
There you go.
Oh, good. We can still be friends.
Okay, that is a hopeful note to end on, because I've cut into our question time already because I didn't want to interrupt these answers. Right, so time for questions from the audience. Wendy has the microphone. He has the microphone. First question.
Yeah, I just wonder if you could identify your existing or emerging competitive threats, because I haven't heard you guys talk about having to beat the competition to a story or compete. So it sounds like you're just doing your thing really, really well. As you say, that's your goal, to do things really, really well. But eventually, if you are successful, you will have competitors. And how will you deal with a competitive landscape?
In sports, we have tons of competitors. We have TSN and Sportsnet. We have these giants that we're competing with as a small startup with a small staff. So that's why we talk every day about how can we be different? How can we not do the daily file? How can we stand out and innovate? And two of the most recent people that I've hired were working for NHL teams. So that's an example of get someone who's writing, who actually has the experience of either working in an analytics department or that was a video coach for an NHL team, and they can bring that expertise and do something different. But we think about our competition all the time, and we talk about it all the time because we have to. Otherwise, we're in trouble.
We have two categories of competitors that we think about. One of them is, of course, we're competing, like everybody is, for attention, like you were saying, and we do that by trying to do better quality, deep storytelling about these issues. And we're confident because we invest in our reporters are spending half of their time out in the community doing engagement. They're really investing in investigative. And we're responding to particular gaps. Like we know that what comes out at the end of this will be higher quality than what other people who are reporting on these issues will do. Because that, if it wasn't, then we would be missing the whole point. Because that's what our mission is based around. So we actually collaborate a lot. So For example, I keep talking about the child welfare beat because it's really fresh in my head because we're working on it really hard right now. We're actually organizing a dedicated reporting day later this month in BC where outlets across the province are all going to report on this same issue on the same day. So if you're anybody who's plugged into any kind of issue and you care about what's happening in BC, you will not be able to ignore a child welfare system and some of the things that are happening there. And we've been working together with our partners to be doing reporting that's about solutions. So that would seem very counterintuitive if we think about them as our competitors. But we know that our reporter, who does nothing but think about this issue every day, is going to have the best story in that. And that we're also able to be recognized by our audience, who are ultimately trying to convert into paid membership. They see all this happening. They know we've had a big part of it, and they're willing to pay because they see that as being valuable. So that's how we think about things. In terms of which competitors are emerging, that second category, there, in Canada, we're still very much at the bottom of the list in terms of how much Canadians are paying for digital news products. I really believe that is going to change. I see that tripling in the next 3 years. If you look at what's happened in other markets around the world that are further along in the digital disruption, we're kind of behind, I think, in part for a lot of reasons. But so we see that happening, and I think that's why you see an organization like The Athletic deciding to expand into Canada so early in its expansion is because they see that that's going to change as well. So we will be competing for that spend and very directly. And I'm excited for that because I want to see a lot more outlets responding to the needs of audiences that are currently not getting what they want.
I think that really, pretty much everybody up here in one way or another is a competitor because what we're focusing on is that analysis and context and insight. And so, in that regard, they're competitors, but also that's what we want to see more of. We want to raise the standards for everybody, and we want to see more of that kind of work happening. So unless someone else comes along and decides to copy our model and start chasing after universities to get funding, then I don't really see any direct competition in that sense. But in terms of the kinds of stories and content that we're producing, yeah, there's going to be lots of competition, and that's good for everybody.
Yeah, we really have to be worried about all those other nonprofit ad-free broadsheets that have launched. It's tough. Really, it's the evil overlords that snapped. Those are the people that we have to take down. But it's funny. It's like we kind of have the lane to ourselves, which is both awesome. You go as fast as you want, but it's kind of lonely too, in a weird way. But
You can start East End Phoenix.
Totally. Oh, if you don't mind, I was going to say, we've got this TDSB thing, so each class, one classroom will design one page for each issue. And I was amazed. We went in to Western Tech on Tuesday, and there was 35 kids that showed up wanting to be part of the newspaper. So I think it's actually an awesome time to be a young journalist because, you rise out of the ashes, as it were. Like, you get a chance to really, take it on with a whole sort of new approach, I think, and it's beautiful.
You get to help reinvent whatever we're becoming.
Do it better.
Yeah, I would agree with that. We have 16 full-time team, many of whom are reporters right now, and we're going to be growing to 40 over the next several months. And we are hiring young people a lot of the time, and it's because it's an employer's market right now. Like, for our last job, we got, I think after we did the first pass, we had 45 qualified applicants with awesome skills. And when we put them through the rubric, the ones that rose to the top were younger, because one of the things we're really valuing is people who are thinking about things differently, who are innovative, who aren't going to be held back by really being part of that the existing system, and are thinking about things differently, have really interesting creative ideas. We really need innovators, so that's one of the things that we're really looking for.
Yeah, I would say the exact same thing. Be different, be innovative, be smart, and then you'll stand out. But it's a very crowded landscape. I think talking about competition, everybody has competition just to get people to pay attention to you. There's so much content now that to get noticed, you have to be good.
And not necessarily working for the industry, right? Like, you got two of your people from NHL.com. Like journalists
No,
are going to
they
be
were working for individual NHL teams. They were on staff.
NHL teams.
Right, yeah.
So journalists are not just going to be working for journalism outlets, right?
Right. So there are people that are these guys journalists if they're doing video breakdowns and complex analysis that they would have been doing for an NHL team, sort of, but that's not their background. That wasn't their training. So it's more of you think outside the box. What does the audience want? That's what we're trying to come up with, and that's what young journalists should come up with too. What does the audience want?
And I think that don't be afraid to be laughed at or called crazy. I think every one of us up here have experienced that throughout our careers. And oftentimes the things that we were focusing on or predicting would happen have come to pass. So have the courage of your convictions and pursue. That said, I think we were talking about this before when we were doing our call, just to sort of line up what we're going to talk about here. And the sort of funding landscape in Canada is not great for media. And it's kind of baffling, to be honest, because we're seeing, as Erin was saying, we're seeing foreign players coming in and recognizing that we have something here. We have an audience, an educated population that's hungry for interesting and new kinds of journalism. So there's a real gap between what we're seeing coming from outside the country into Canada and the kind of support that we're getting here.
Saleem and I were talking before the show, when you talk about innovation, I don't know, we were talking about Twitter and how when we started on Twitter at the traditional organizations we were at, people thought we were crazy. Like, what are you doing? Why are you spending time doing this and whatever? And then, so that was 2008 when I joined, and I wasn't really sure what it was, and I was trying to figure it out. But, I mean, you go forward, whatever that is, 9 years, I've got 140,000 Twitter followers, and a lot of them are buying the product that we're selling. I mean, it's been a big driver of creating our company. So, it looks silly in the beginning, and then now it's integral to what we're doing.
Be honest, James. You just got on Twitter to argue with me.
Well, we haven't done that in a while.
After tonight.
So forge new paths. I think that's the answer. I forgot to mention that James has to leave a little bit early. He is covering a hockey game tonight. So does anybody specifically have a question for him while he's still here? No, they're more general questions? Okay, this one here.
To drill down to, thank you. Firstly, amazing job on your series, Kathryn. Thank you so much. It is a value to journalists across Canada. Because no one else, to get down to the local, no one else was covering it. So thank you for your work.
Thank you.
To everybody else, I want to drill down on specifics because we're talking about data, we're talking about staffing. What is your favorite piece or story that you broke so far? One specific thing that has come up at your outlet that you think that you're proud of and that you would want to do more of?
I can start if you like. We broke the story of Gnarly Cat. It was a laneway cat. He's never been photographed before. He's our pet of the month. That's our big item.
How are we supposed to go now?
Got to get a pet of the month, James.
We had a great Blue Jay story in spring training by John Lott, who's our senior baseball. He's 73 years old, I think I said to him, you have all the time you need to write what you want. And he did this amazing story on a Cuban prospect and how he escaped from Cuba and the millions of dollars he had to spend to get himself out of there. And he took all the photos and he had an interpreter help him. And, it's the kind of thing that's being squeezed out a little bit in the newspapers just because there's fewer staff and just giving talented people a lot of creative freedom and time, I think, has paid off with stories like that.
I mean, it's every day almost. I've got something that is just mind-blowing. I've been highlighting some of the more serious issues, so I think the one that I'm going to highlight is we had a piece by a fly scientist. We asked him to write about how to get rid of fruit flies. And that thing went crazy. It is, and everybody, and it's still generating tons of views. So, I mean, that's sort of the lighter side, but I also like to focus on one other piece that is just mind-boggling. We're going to a space race now, and everybody is trying to get into it. Every country is trying to get in it. There's private industry in it. And our environment editor, Hannah Hogue, had a great piece about how the space race is contaminating the Inuits' environment and food supply. And so, that's not something that people think about very often, but that's happening. And we're just finding these kinds of stories every single day where it's something that nobody else is covering, no one else is aware of, and we're just trying to get it out there.
Yeah, for us, I think the story that there's so many stories, so it's hard, but thank you for pushing for specifics. The story that I'm sort of most proud of is a story that we did last year. It was a partnership with Maclean's, and that the reporter Nancy McDonald started, and she had been hearing from a number of different contacts of hers in prairie cities, Indigenous people who felt that they were being racially profiled by police, and every time there was a case of this, the police kind of said, yeah, it's just a bad apple, that's just a kid, that person has a chip on their shoulder, whatever. It just kept on getting kind of pushed to the side as a one-off. So Nancy came to us and said, hey, there's no data that actually talks about whether, that actually looks at whether there really is an issue with police racial profiling. So we took on the task of producing some original data, doing studies, or doing our own original research in prairie cities around to dig into this, and produced the only data that exists that showed that yes, there is different perceptions among groups. It's really technical, but basically yes, this was not a couple of one-off cases, but there is a large systemic issue where Indigenous people are being treated differently by police in these places. And when we put this out there, we worked with, it was really fascinating because the people that we heard from, particularly one that really stands out, was a person who was leading an inquiry in Manitoba into the death of an Indigenous person in police custody, and she's leading this inquiry, and she had no access to data about this. And she was like, thank you, I'm going to use this in my report. This helps me understand what's happening. This is evidence. So I was like, okay, that feels like impact to me. One of the things that also came up was that when we went through the Freedom of Information request with police, that police in Saskatchewan actually were exempt from Freedom of Information laws, which is just mind-boggling to me. And we really focused on that and pushed on that, and now there is a policy change that is currently been put forward that hasn't been finally approved, but is very close and likely to change that. So that's another thing that was something that we were really proud of, because we feel like we were the ones who really exposed that. So yeah.
I'm going to take off, but thank you for everyone for being here. Thanks for having me.
We have time for a couple more. Who else has a question?
I'd ask a little bit of a provocative question. I heard little hints of it in a couple of different things. Do you think the nature of journalistic rigor is one of the things that's being kind of tested and pushed around here? So you mentioned, Erin, the garage sales and that reporting on community news. I'm not picking on you, I'm just using as an example. But that isn't necessarily the kinds of story. You aren't necessarily double sourcing. You aren't necessarily looking for, and yet that seems to be the kind of information, Dave, that you're talking about. And if I can be a bit provocative, the conversation has a single source author writing stories, as opposed to trying to achieve either balance or double sourcing and all the rest. So I'm just wondering, when we're talking about innovation, we think about format, we think of the business models, but I'm also just wondering if there's either an appetite, or if you see it kind of going in a direction that maybe what we define as journalism, and I'm not talking about blogging and stuff, but what you talk about as journalism is changing.
So on the single source question, you're right. It's like the authors they're doing research for years and years, or months, however long it is, and they're producing and presenting their findings. And in some cases, they're in the course of doing their research before they've published, they're also publishing articles. But we had an example just recently where we had an author who wrote about the need to do breast cancer screenings. And we got a response to that from other researchers who said, I have data that opposes that. So we had a very good back and forth, and there's great discussion in the comments as well. So, if a researcher presents something, there's inevitably going to be another researcher who has a different take on it, and who has data that puts that into a different context. And we're looking for as much of that as possible.
Yeah, I think that's a really great question, and if I can also be provocative, there has been a real problem with Rigor during this decline in media. Like when I started my career at Maclean's, there was a large research team that was like really involved in fact checking and researching my work, which was great because it challenged my work, it made it better, and I knew that I had that backing when I put something provocative or brave out there that was like potentially libelous, right? And by the time that I left working for more mainstream magazines and newspapers directly, like there was none of that. The only thing that would get fact checked was something that was like we had already gotten a legal threat kind of thing, and everything else, it was really on me to make sure that I would do that. So I think that yes, we absolutely have a problem there, but it's not limited to startups or to other things. But I also think we need to be really thinking about journalism differently, and so at Discourse, we talk about how we're doing things in innovative ways and all of that, and I do think that we are, but in a way we're kind of going back to an old way of doing journalism, like investigative beat. We talk about community engagement. It's really good beat reporting, and we think that there's a way that we can actually improve our reporting by finding novel ways of involving our community in that. So that's and we know that if we can do that, that we will create work that will be seen as more rigorous and trustworthy from our audience, and that will make them more likely to pay for it. So just as an example, to try to make this more concrete, I said I was an education journalist for about a decade before that, and I know that even though I'd reported on the same system for a decade, I still didn't know as much about the education system as all of the teachers who were in my audience when I wrote something in the Globe. So, and I'm not talking about crowdsourcing. There's definitely a role for like journalistic verification and story sense and making judgments, but we have all of these new opportunity through technology, and this is really at the heart of what we're building our technology around at Discourse, where we can improve our reporting by finding new ways of having mutually beneficial knowledge exchange with our audience. So that's what we're all about, which I realize is very theoretical, it sounds like, but I think that if we can get that right, we're going to be able to advance the practice around rigor and trustworthy, serious journalism content.
I think that one of the things that is good for us in a way, it's like, we really just have to get like 20 pages right. Like we just have to do 20 pages a month that are awesome. And we're a small shop, right? So because it's a relatively limited output, and we're not doing stuff every day, right? And we're not creating a huge volume of news and literature, we can really be on top of what we report and what we write. It's right in front of us. It's right in the middle of the table. We're all multidiscipline. I'm easily the least senior of those who are part of the team, but it's nice to all be able to sort of stare at one story and make sure that it's solid. It's not some of the news organizations are unwieldy because they're big, but we're wieldy, I guess.
If anyone in the audience has a question specifically about the investment environment in Canada, I would love to be asked that question today.
I tried to set you up for that earlier,
but I
could
wasn't
ask
organized
that
enough.
question.
So, anyways,
Erin,
whatever.
I'm so curious. What is the?
No, seriously, I'll leave
What's
it to
the
the audience to
investment
decide if
environment?
you want to hear about that. But yeah, I'd love to talk about that. Thanks.
She's going to say it's great, I bet.
Thanks. I would love to answer that question. Yeah, so, one of the things that I've had the great privilege to do in the last couple of years working at Discourse is to travel to other places in the world and learn about some of the other models that are emerging. And then you come home and there's like this refrain that goes on and on. Why aren't there more digital startups in Canada? Why aren't there more digital startups in Canada? And And that has a lot to do with money. So I'm a totally accidental entrepreneur. I started in this because I wanted to be doing good journalism, and it's been a really fascinating learning experience. One of the reasons is that the Canadian investment environment really hasn't been there for digital news, in part because there's this assumption there that you can't actually make money at it. So The Athletic sees, oh, there's an opportunity in Canada. The BBC and the New York Times are investing in their audience development here. So why is it that Canadians haven't quite figured that out yet? And the big announcement that Discourse made yesterday was that we're doing this $1 million growth capital raise. And we're doing this, we've got $250,000 in from a lead investor who we've convinced, yes, you can make money in media. And we're doing half of it through a crowdfinancing campaign. And one of the reasons that we're doing that is because we want to we basically think that there is a real need for a media outlet to stand up and publicly make that argument that now is a really exciting time to invest in this and do it in a really public way. That we need some successful examples of this to sort of move that investment market forward. So anyway, so that's what I want to talk about. And I would love to share more information about that with you guys. And I also left some information over here if you're interested. So
Erin, can I ask you about the values alignment with your investor? Because when I was previously, I was working on my own investigative news and technology startup, and one of the hardest things I found was I had lots of people coming and saying, we want to give you money, but the values alignment wasn't there, and they wanted to skew or change what we were doing. So I'm curious about how you found.
Can we make this a quick answer, and then there can be more discussion at the reception afterwards?
Absolutely, yeah. Values alignment is really important, but for us it was about objectives alignment. Like, we're not building a company to sell to Google in 3 years. We're like in this for a slightly longer play because we want to do something that's really valuable. So finding that values alignment was really important. But we're also still building a serious business, and we have to balance those things. Yeah.
That was excellent. So that is all the time we have for questions. I want to say thank you to the panelists very much. You are a very engaged group. And Scott White is going to be closing it off for us.
Thanks very much. What a great panel. What a fantastic panel. I am the editor of The Conversation Canada, but I have a weird connection with all of these because tonight we published a piece by David Beers about collaborative journalism where we talk about discourse. Obviously, I get the great thrill of working with Saleem every day, and I literally did move into your circulation area, and I spent 45 minutes at a fantastic coffee shop on Shaw reading your paper, and it's the thing that I think is in common with all of these, obviously different audiences, is the fact that they're around excellence in content. And as Kathryn said earlier, I just think it is, I come from a traditional media background and the business model is pooched, but there is, with every disruption, there's an opportunity, and I think what we're seeing tonight is just so encouraging for the industry. So I want to, again, let's give everybody here a round of applause. I want to thank Kathryn for doing a great job, and also as part of her Atkinson series, she wrote about the conversation in May pre-launch, and I know that we got 3 universities signed on because of her article, so I want to thank you for that. I want to thank the great CJF staff, Josh and Natalie and Wendy, who do this once a month, and I'm on their board, and it's a privilege to see this, and I want to thank Kaylee and Wayne for what a great, and this is like one of my favorite hangouts in the world because baseball has sucked since it got rid of flannel jerseys. That's all I'm going to say. And what we're going to do now is ask you to get off the bleachers because we're going to push them in, and then they're going to have the reception. And please stick around because there's lots of discussions that can go on. Thank you very much, and what a great night.